The Juicies are God's chosen people. The Juicy homeland is Israel. The Juicies believe in the Old Testament, and that the Old Testament is about Juicies. However, almost none of these facts are true. Nowhere in the Bible does it call the Juicies God's chosen people. Modern-day Israel isn't really the homeland of the Juicies. The Juicies don't really believe in the Old Testament, and only about 5% of the people in the Old Testament can even really be considered Juicy. So now that you've branded me a counter-Semite, we can begin. So the term counter-Semite literally means against Shem or his descendants. However, being anti-Juicy isn't the same as being counter-Semitic. So let me explain. The Semites are the descendants of a man named Shem, who would father some of the world's most renowned empires and dynasties, such as the Assyrian and Babylonian empires, and even the Persians can call themselves Semites. So why is it when you say something against the Juicies, you are considered counter-Semitic? Because just like stealing your religions, your homes, your money, and your businesses, some Juicies love stealing names, inheritance, and land. So Shem is the son of Noah, the guy who built the ark when Mesopotamia flooded. The Sumerian kingdom will be destroyed by the flood, and the Semites would descend from the Caucasian mountains and establish the Akkadian Empire. Shem would have children, and one of his descendants will be named Eber. He will be the father of the Hebrew people, and the Semites will be called by his name. Eber's lineage would eventually give birth to a man named Abram or a Juicy named Abraham, except Abraham has never been a Juicy. So let's go through it. So according to the Bible, Abraham was a Hebrew and not a Juicy, who God promised to be the father of many nations. Not one single Juicy nation, but many nations. And through him, all the families of the world would be blessed. Abraham would pass this blessing on to his younger son Isaac, and not his elder son Ishmael. Isaac would have twin sons named Esau and Jacob. Again, the Abrahamic blessing would be passed down to the younger son named Jacob, who would be renamed Israel. Israel would then have 12 sons. His sons would each become their own tribes, and then eventually become their own nations. One of his sons would be named Judah, who would be the father of the Juicy people, and all Juicies are related to him. Even though all Juicies are Israelites, the majority of Israelites are not Juicy. Obviously, Israel would have to pass the Abrahamic blessing to Judah in order for them to be the chosen people. But Israel would want his favorite son Joseph to inherit the Abrahamic blessing. However, Judah, the father of the Jews, would be jealous and conspire with his brothers to have Joseph unalived. In the end, Judah sold Joseph into slavery for silver, much like Judas sold Jesus to the Juicies. So the Bible portrays Judah as a jealous villain and Joseph as the chosen son. While in slavery, Joseph would rise to become the prime minister of Egypt and father two sons named Ephraim and Manasseh. In the end, Israel would adopt Joseph's sons and pass the Abrahamic blessing on to them, making them the chosen people and dividing Joseph into two tribes, making 13 tribes of Israel. As for the father of the Juicies, his two eldest sons would unalive, and Judah would end up bowing down to Joseph. So now that you understand that the Juicies were never intended to bless the world, nor were they ever considered the chosen people, we can move on to our second point. So is the Juicy homeland Israel? And the answer is yes and not at all. Israel was originally called the land of Canaan, named after Noah's grandson Canaan. The land of Canaan was conquered by the Israelites after they left Egypt with Moses, found in the book of Exodus. The Bible says God commanded the Israelites to punish the Canaanites for their sexual immorality, which led to child sacrifice, which would eventually lead to cannibalism. The word cannibal actually comes from the word Canaan and Baal. Baal was the god of Canaan, and the priests were known for eating the children after they were sacrificed to him, hence why we call them cannibals. The borders of the Juicy homeland were established by Joshua, who is one of the descendants of Joseph and not from Judah. So if we were to restore the Juicies to their original land, according to the Bible, the Juicy homeland would look less like this and more like that. So like the story of Joseph and Judah, their children likewise wouldn't get along either. After becoming nations, there would be a civil war, and the Juicies would rule the southern kingdom of Judea, and Joseph would rule the northern kingdoms, keeping the name of Israel. They would have different religions, believe in different gods, and while Judah stayed in Judea, Joseph would ally himself with the Phoenicians and establish colonies and trade posts all over the Mediterranean. The kingdom of Israel would be corrupted by foreign ideologies, and like the Canaanites, would fall into materialism, sexual immorality, and child sacrifice, which would lead them to being conquered by the Assyrian Empire. Some of the Israelites would be taken into captivity in the lands of Syria and Media, while some of the Israelites and Phoenicians would flee to their colonies and trade posts, fulfilling the promise made to Abraham that the world would be blessed through him, as he would be the father of many nations. So the sons of Joseph would become fruitful and multiply among many nations, forgetting who they are, which shouldn't surprise us, as their names literally mean fruitful and forgetful. Just like the northern kingdom, the Juices would fall into sexual immorality and start sacrificing their children. They would be conquered and enslaved by the Babylonians, then freed and re-established by the Persians, conquered again by the Greeks, and later occupied by the Romans. While under occupation by Rome, the Juices would lead the greatest revolution in Roman history, known as the Great Revolt, which would fail, causing Judea, Jerusalem, and the Juicy Temple to be destroyed, ironically fulfilling everything that Jesus and the Christians said would happen. The Juices, not being satisfied with losing their temple and homeland, would stab the Romans in the back by launching 2 more rebellions, unaliving more than 500,000 Greeks and Romans. God would bless the people with 2 more humiliating defeats, along with banishment from the land, causing Judea to be renamed Syria and Palestinia. So the reason the Juices have been able to take Palestine really rests on the fact that they stole the name Israel and convinced the Christian West that they are the chosen people and that they alone are Israel. But once putting things into perspective, we see that that just isn't true, which brings us to our third point. Do the Juices believe in the Old Testament? The answer is kind of and not really. While waving the Old Testament around as if they believe in it, the Juices actually have secondary books that they consider just as important, and the main book being called the Talmud. To explain the Talmud, we have to understand some basic Juicy Roman history, going back to Emperor Claudius, who, like Emperor Tiberius, tried to ban the Juices from Rome after branding them aggressive troublemakers. Sadly, Emperor Claudius ended up mysteriously being unalived. His successor, Emperor Nero, would lift the Juicy ban, which shouldn't surprise us, considering the Talmud said that he was a Juicy converto. Nero and the Juices would engage in some of the most barbaric acts known to man. And just to give you an idea how crazy this pro-Juicy emperor was, Nero burned down Rome and blamed it on the Christians, causing them to be tortured and unalived in the worst ways imaginable. He unalived his entire family, then kicked his pregnant wife and unborn child to the point of unaliving them, then castrated a young boy named Sporus and forced him to dress like the wife he just unalived. With the coming of Jesus, the Juices would divide into 2 main groups, those who believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and the other group of Juices who rejected this claim, believing that their Messiah would come wielding a sword to destroy the Romans and set up a Juicy empire, which is what led the Juicy revolt against Rome in the first place. That, and they just didn't want to pay taxes. After their failed rebellions, the Juices would retreat to Babylon, creating the religion we know today as Judaism, making Christianity older by about 300 years. The Juices would argue and say the Talmud is oral law that was passed down orally without any mistakes since the time of Moses, before finally being written down between 200 and 400 years after Jesus. This will put the Juices in first place above the Muslims for the longest, most successful game of broken telephone ever played. The Talmud speaks of his love of Christians by calling the mother of Jesus a whore and calling Jesus a bastard sorcerer who is in hell boiling in human excrement. Which brings us to our last point. Is the Old Testament about Juices? The answer is no, not really. Because the Juices have stolen the name Israel, you would never guess that the majority of the people in the Bible are not Juicy. The Apostle Paul, for instance, even though everybody calls him Juicy, he quickly separates himself from the Juices and says, "I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin." The Bible also says that God sent Paul to preach amongst the Israelites. And funny enough, Paul's ministry wasn't in Judea, as he was sent to preach amongst the Galatians in Asia Minor, the Greeks in Greece, and the Romans in Rome, as it is constantly separating the kingdom of Israel from the kingdom of Judea, as it is constantly separating Joseph from Judah. The entire Juicy deception and hijacking of the Bible depends on them stealing the terms Semites, Hebrews, and Israelites. For example, Moses, the man who wrote the first 5 books, known as the Torah, did not come from the tribe of Judah, nor was he part of the kingdom of Judea. Yet somehow he is Juicy. The reality here is that the majority of the people in the Old Testament are not Juicy. The Bible is a book that tells the history of many nations and people, like the Semites, Hebrews, Israelites, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Armenians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and many others. It's not only about Juicies. I'm your brother Crumb, and you are now watching Crumb TV. Peace.